"Because," she said, looking out of the window with sorrowful eyes, "I know your papa would wish it to be so, Seddy. He loved his home very much, and there are many things to be thought of that a little boy can't quite understand. I should be a selfish little mother if I did not send you. When you're a man, you will see why." Seddy shook his head mournfully. "I shall be very sorry to leave Mr. Hobbs," he said. "I'm afraid he'll miss me, and I shall miss him, and I shall miss them all." When Mr. Havisham, who was the family lawyer of the Earl of Dorincourt, and who had been sent by him to bring Lord Fauntleroy to England, came the next day, Cedric heard many things. But somehow it did not console him to hear that he was to be a very rich man when he grew up, and that he would have castles here and castles there, and great parks and deep mines and grand estates and tenantry. He was troubled about his friend Mr. Hobbs, and he went to see him at the store soon after breakfast in great anxiety of mind. He found him reading the morning paper, and he approached him with a grave manner. He really felt it would be a great shock to Mr. Hobbs to hear what had befallen him, and on his way to the store he had been thinking how it would be best to break the news. "Hello," said Mr. Hobbs. "Morning." "Good morning," said Cedric. He did not climb up on the high stool as usual, but sat down on a cracker box and clasped his knee, and was so silent for a few moments that Mr. Hobbs finally looked up inquiringly over the top of his newspaper. "Hello," he said again. Cedric gathered all his strength of mind together. "Mr. Hobbs," he said, "do you remember what we were talking about yesterday morning?" "Well," replied Mr. Hobbs, "seems to me it was England." "Yes," said Cedric, "but just when Mary came for me, you know." Mr. Hobbs rubbed the back of his head. "We was mentioning Queen Victoria and the aristocracy." "Yes," said Cedric rather hesitatingly. And earls, don't you know?" "Why, yes," returned Mr. Hobbs. "We did touch him up a little, that's so." Cedric flushed up to the curly bang on his forehead. Nothing so embarrassing as this had ever happened to him in his life. He was a little afraid that it might be a trifle embarrassing to Mr. Hobbs, too. "You said," he proceeded, "that you wouldn't have them sitting round on your cracker barrels." "So I did," returned Mr. Hobbs stoutly, "and I meant it. Let 'em try it, that's all." "Mr. Hobbs," said Cedric, "one is sitting on this box now." Mr. Hobbs almost jumped out of his chair. "What?" he exclaimed. "Yes," Cedric announced, with due modesty. "I am one, or I am going to be. I won't deceive you." Mr. Hobbs looked agitated. He rose up suddenly and went to look at the thermometer. "The mercury's got into your head," he exclaimed, turning back to examine his young friend's countenance. "It is a hot day. How do you feel? Got any pain? When did you begin to feel that way?" He put his big hand on the little boy's hair. This was more embarrassing than ever. "Thank you," said Seddy. "I'm all right. There is nothing the matter with my head. I'm sorry to say it's true, Mr. Hobbs. That was what Mary came to take me home for. Mr. Havisham was telling my mamma, and he's a lawyer." Mr. Hobbs sank into his chair and mopped his forehead with his handkerchief. "One of us has got a sunstroke," he exclaimed. "No," returned Cedric. "We haven't. We shall have to make the best of it, Mr. Hobbs. Mr. Havisham came all the way from England to tell us about it. My grandpapa sent him." Mr. Hobbs stared wildly at the innocent, serious little face before him. "Who is your grandfather?" he asked. Cedric put his hand in his pocket and carefully drew out a piece of paper on which something was written in his own round, irregular hand. "I couldn't easily remember it, so I wrote it down on this," he said, and he read aloud slowly. "John Arthur Molyneux Errol, Earl of Dorincourt. That is his name, and he lives in a castle, in 2 or 3 castles, I think. And my papa, who died, was his youngest son, and I shouldn't have been a lord or an earl if my papa hadn't died, and my papa wouldn't have been an earl if his 2 brothers hadn't died.